When thinking about assembly, and I mean, I think that you all received the kind of like initial description of what it is, and it's pretty much everything. Kind of like there are a bunch of like different topics that are being covered there, but the idea is to invite you to kind of develop together this kind of like organic programming where people can use the space and to like alternate hosts with kind of like shared concerns, like merging kind of communities together, merging different perspectives together, and then also thinking of those methodologies, how to actually employ them in the capacities that we can, and in this like really difficult time that is ahead of us of like deep economic recession. We also like recognize that it's the pivotal thing to do now is to think like hyper locally and to be active with all the kind of like within support systems and mutual aid, be kind of like acknowledge one's privileges and act upon where it's possible to actually be of help. But on the other side, it's really important to have the kind of like simultaneous conversation when it comes to kind of like transnational, international solidarity of cultural workers, because that kind of horizontal conversations and cross-pollinations will be important and have always been important, and Rashmi will write a book about it. So to have those kind of like processes simultaneously happening throughout the upcoming period. So I'm going to stop there, and then Josh can introduce the assembly.
Yeah, so I mean, you did a great job at really introducing it. I just want to add that we had initially wanted to do this in person, that we could invite everybody over, and as soon as lockdown is relaxed in some way and we all figure out ways to make it comfortable, we're going to start having open houses here. And so those who can be present, we'd love to open our homes and have that. So, but in the meantime, this is really great as it allows people to join us, to join all of us who might not otherwise be able to. And I just want to say that, I mean, you covered basically that aspect of it. Just want to say that we'll be doing these every other Friday, and then in between we'll be doing studio visits, but also conversations, and also anti-fair hangouts, which is a collaboration with Sonja, which is an extension of one of her projects, Mapping Anxieties. And I don't know, Sonja, do you want to talk at all about it? Do you want to?
Yeah, I can just say a few words. So basically, the HEKLER Anti-Fear Hangout, as we're calling it, the idea is to start with the starting point of anxiety and fear that's felt on an individual basis, as the initial proposal and invitation for this hangout. So all of the invited participants would be prompted to think about, what is the fear and anxiety that's really at the forefront for you at the moment, both in terms of the specific fear as well as bodily sensation or anything else that comes up with that. And fear is typically something that is experienced in the privacy of our inner world, and depending on who you are, you might share it to a variable degree with your family and friends, but it's something that's very privately experienced, and also it's something that tends to shut down the individual. So here, the idea is to, in the context of the meeting, invert this sensation of fear into a consideration, make it a starting point for consideration of the commons. And, with the commons, sort of thinking about things that bring us together, but also really specifically with the formal definition of the commons as the means of just survival that are accessible to everyone. And as we all are very well aware, especially in this group, there's been just a tremendous decline and really what belongs to this notion of the commons. So here the idea is to really kind of think about reimagining the commons. And specifically during these meetings, what we envision happening is sort of having, Nataša and I will alternate hosting, and then we invite, anyone who might be interested to co-host and host, to basically alternate in hosting these events, and which would have variable formats of employing poetry, spoken word, craft, movement, healing practices, experimental workshops, but in a sense be both kind of having access to skill sets and skill sets that might kind of touch upon modes of means of reproduction or access to means of reproduction, as well as just sort of considering and reimagining the commons. And also we would sometimes introduce readings as well related to the idea of the commons. So.
Great, thank you, Sonja. Cool.
Yeah, so I think that's that when it comes to introduction. So practically, like, this is an open invitation to create the series of gatherings, which, like, even when what Josh mentioned in terms of like whenever the kind of physical distancing starts like loosening up, to actually have a balance between continuous kind of like virtual gatherings, but also physical gatherings, like depending of, kind of like proximity. Do you have any questions? No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The mapping anxieties project sounds super interesting, but I was trying to understand its correlation to HEKLER. Is that just one of the iterations, or is that weaving throughout the potential other meetings?
So practically mapping, and like so this is also like the way of working is like very organic in terms of like having like multiple moving parts. And then depending on like what the needs are, like how, like in what directions the conversations go, practically anti-fear became kind of like a like pod, kind of like subcategory of assembly. So it's practically like a part of assembly. But it will, with the difference of like reading group being, gatherings as such, in this way, the anti-fear becomes a way of kind of like communal gathering through more of a kind of like feminist like healing practices that take different formats. So in that sense, like what Sonja said, that like co-hosting and hosting, like the idea is the same as same with an assembly, to actually have to alternate hosts. So it's not it's not all, for example, like next reading group will be Rashmi and Dina, and they're bringing their own like material and like points of discussion. But when it comes to anti-fear, for example, Sanja, who is here, Sanja is working, thinking about kind of like poetry workshop that she would host, and use it as an opportunity to kind of like workshop some ideas that she has, but that are also like engaging the group. And so it's an open format that is kind of like, in a lack of a better word, kind of like an open calendar. So one can, activate the kind of like anti-fear hangout that, mirrors one's practice or interest, or, like what one feels comfortable actually kind of like mediating in a group. So there is a range of kind of like range of actions that are not necessarily like academic, but it's just like, as Sonja said, that like putting kind of comments in the foreground.
And I would just add, I would just add that I think also one of the main sort of structural differences is that, assembly, as we're, the meeting that's running on Fridays is very much kind of has a more academic format of just being based on a set of readings and following this kind of a structure. But for the anti-fear, it will be more of a, I don't know if embodied is the right word, but it will be more focused on actually an activity that will be shared by the group rather than on a set of readings. Sometimes there'll be readings, but the action will be shared by basically by the group, if that makes sense.
You want to talk about readings?
And also, like, I just want to go back to Janna's question. So mapping anxiety was very different project. It's not this. So that's where the maybe like the confusion came from. So because like mapping anxiety was like a specific project that Sonja was developing individually, maybe like 2 years ago. And then that was a starting point for us to start a conversation. And then that kind of through conversation between us, but also like Farideh and Shimrit were part of one meeting. We started kind of like transforming the format and thinking of it as, you know, based on the response that we were getting.
Okay. Yeah, the semantics of it sound precisely my interest, and I don't quite understand it, how it looks logistically, but I'll have to like reach out to you individually, I guess, maybe. Thanks.
So regarding the readings, obviously there's many readings that are available for this, and we selected these with the idea that we could touch upon some basic institutions, like you know, looking at museums, looking at university education, looking at what it looks like when an artist takes educational and artistic activism. And so each text, as I understand it, I think as we understand it, and I want to hear what everybody's responses, interpretations are, is that each one touches upon those things. And if I can, I wanted to start with talking about the Maria Lind reading, the Why Mediate Art, especially since it's, you know, as I think many people probably know, it's been a lot of mass layoffs at major institutions, including MoMA, and we found this reading talking about the education, like how the educational origins, or exactly how they were incorporated in MoMA's mission at the beginning, and how they've transformed over time, and where that leads us to today. And you want to talk about that at all?
I think, I mean, I would like to just like open it up. So if someone wants to take a lead and just like reflect upon the Maria Lind text, and we can just like start the conversation from there.
Okay.
So we are not occupying all the space.
Okay. Do you have people on mute or no?
No, you can unmute. You all can unmute yourself whenever you want.
Are you sure? Yeah.
I think so.
Oh, yeah.
So practically, maybe to start with the question of, you know, what is also shared in the text, like thinking of education departments within museum setting and their purpose of kind of educating, you know, initially educating consumer and someone who is actually, you know, the difference between consumer and kind of a responsible citizen, educated citizen, and how does that function through the process of mediating art. And the model that museums have as institutions of kind of like having the most resources to actually facilitate education, even though like underfunding the cultural workers who are actually doing the job. The way how art is being taught is very limited. There's also a question of kind of like segregation of art segregation, of kind of like keeping it into a particular realm that doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the realities of communities in which first and foremost museums are located, or from the neighborhoods, from the city, like the cities, but also the overall kind of like national politics towards arts and culture as something that we've seen in the past like 20 years kind of increasingly being professionalized, as treated as industry, versus a kind of like liberation tool, and a tool to actually learn more kind of like specifically about the context in which we live and act and reenact kind of certain values. So I guess I would like, to hear what you, especially like if people are, coming from different contexts, if, what do you see as failures from the aspect of kind of hierarchy, funding, context, but also like successful or kind of salvageable models within with these like educational departments.
I guess one of the things that I was thinking reading this article about education, and also emphasizing on the idea that the pedagogy and institutions are happening with the fear that something can go wrong or the wrong perception of the audience. So we have to lead the audience to understand what we want them to understand. But also along with that, with the curation of the museums and including the artwork that can be innovative, but within the structure of the museum. So again, avoiding the issue of things possibly going wrong. And I guess for me, something that can connect all of these together, I want to go back to the education system of, what's happening in the art schools. And I don't think any of them, like the education system in the museum, is not necessarily different from the education system that is happening in academia and in universities. And it's the lack of inclusivity, the lack of, what could possibly go wrong in the museum is because the public audience doesn't necessarily come from the context of where the art could possibly come from. So the story can get lost. And that comes because one of the reasons of that could be the lack of our inclusive education when it comes to the roots of that. And I guess, like, I don't know, as an example, I feel like as somebody who is not coming from, I had my main art education back in Iran, and then for my master's came here. And I feel like as somebody who is coming from another country, I knew a lot about what's happening in the art scene in America and also in Europe. But when it comes to an exchange of information, talking about what's coming from my region, there is that lack of education and lack of understanding. And that lack of education and lack of understanding leads to to that understanding that could go wrong. So then we need the text, we need the pedagogy to fix that, but also that being used, I guess, like I'm bringing in all these ideas, but I guess the text and the pedagogy of the museum is also coming from the perspective of the white male curator, and barely or hardly sometimes curators who are coming from that region or coming from that understanding. So I guess, like, it's a cycle that all the pieces are wrong, even though there has been some sort of an attempt to educate and to, I guess, to lead. But because the foundation, I guess, going back to the education, the foundation, there's something missing in the foundation, and that all the blocks are not working.
Farideh, if I could respond to you, because you're obviously really speaking to my background here. So, and props to you. Farideh has actually taught in my class. So is Josh. So is Nataša. So God bless all you guys. Anyways, I completely agree. There is an utter lack of diversity. And I got to say, as the diversity candidate in the last 2 universities that I've worked at, and like, I was conscripted to rewrite certain, like, the art history syllabi to make it more inclusive. But there was no way actually on a broad level to implement that and check what each person was doing, because teachers understandably were railing against having to sort of comply to any sort of standardization. They wanted their own sort of unique methods to be honored. That being said, that's simply not an excuse for only having, I mean, it was a photography syllabus with that, never included Gordon Parks or whoever, and like a million different people that should have been part of it. So yeah, that's really a problem. I think another problem is also for diversity hires like myself. I hate to put myself in that category, but honestly, it's probably what I am. They typically, when they get people like me in a university, in a smaller university, aka something that's not Harvard or Columbia, we have to stand in for all of the oppressed world. So I'm I'm called in to teach, like, I don't know, Aztec art to Chinese art to, and I don't know shit about any of that stuff, but but I'm supposed to say something about it. I mean, all I can say is I overcompensate by trying to like pronounce my rolled R's a little harder, but I don't know what I'm talking about. So like some sort of like more like a meaningful effort. I mean, honestly, it's remarkably retrograde. It's very like 1960s. It's very much split along a West and non-Western model. And obviously that needs to go away. That should have gone away 100 years ago, you know? But in this Western, non-Western model, if you're me, then you have to teach the non-West, which includes obviously the Americas if you're not a white person. That model needs to certainly change. Honestly, like, I don't feel terribly optimistic that it can happen anytime soon, because as universities endure this COVID situation, the adjuncts are the first on the chopping block, and they're the ones who can potentially alleviate some of this, or at least take some of the stress off the shoulders of the rest of the faculty. As much as I hate the adjuncting system, that's there's a role that that will be cut. Adjuncts are on the chopping block right now, and professors like myself are now being called to do extra classes, meaning more superficial understandings of classes that I know nothing about. So I think it's only going to get worse unless we actually rethink structurally the nature of a university or an academic education. Oh, and sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but one more second. Farideh, one thing you said that really struck me is the greater representation. I agree wholeheartedly. That being said, I also don't necessarily believe that to be able to talk about Cuban art, I have to be Cuban. I don't want sort of a minutiae of representation, rather I want sort of a constellation being represented.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree with that. I don't think that you should be from that place, but as you just mentioned as an example, like not dragging somebody to do something that they don't have any information because of the lack of resources, or because, you know, hundreds of other reasons that they're not reaching people who actually have the knowledge to teach those. I mean, not to question, but I guess, like, yeah, that's the struggle that we're all dealing with as educators and being part of academia, that I don't know, lack of enough job to have it, and also lack of, I guess, resources. I don't know, there's a lot of problems.
But I think that, like, when regarding this idea of representation and who gets to speak of what and educate what, well, as a person of color and also a queer person, I think it is actually very essential for you to have, yes, people that are speaking about these issues, representing them from a lived experience, from an embodied place of knowledge. I mean, yes, you do not have to be Cuban to speak about Cuban art or whatever, but I think there are some cases where, yes, you do have to understand more in deeper depth what the subjects are about. I don't know.
Oh, completely agreed. I would never disagree with that. Obviously, there needs to be greater representation. All I'm saying is sometimes what I've also discovered is with some of my colleagues, they have this sort of unjustified fear that they're going to be called out for teaching about cultures that they don't belong to. And honestly, I've actually experienced that. I've had students scream at me for not being the same color as them and teaching them about a particular kind of art. But the fact is, to exclude anything that's not like a South Asian something context art is ridiculous. It robs my students of the opportunity to learn of a broader context. So I'm absolutely not at odds with what you're saying. I just think there needs to be a slight shift in the way that we sort of look at teaching.
So just, do you think that, again, maybe to Rashmi, but to everybody, do you think it's still possible to have that happen in the institution, not as it is, but even what it could be, what we currently understand the university to be? Or does it really need to just move outside of that system? Like, those of you who are educators and are working, is there, you know, in thinking about any of impossibility, what are the possibilities? Is it going to be Zoom? Is it people just congregating and seeking information on their own? have we outgrown the university and that style of learning? And if so, what are people's thoughts about what could replace that for yourself now, or what you think a student, or anybody who's looking for information? Are there any thoughts about that?
Well, I think that there is a very specific and very important role of the both institutions and also like universities and academia, which is like the social aspect of bringing people together and clashing their ideas, opinions, perspectives, genders, everything, identities. However, actually not however, but I think that this new paradigm of learning, like this Zoom environment, is a way of deconstructing these spaces, yes, but I think it lacks in this social encounter and clash, because at any moment I can just, okay, you know what, I gotta go, or, oh, I'm going downstairs and grab some tea because whatever, so I think that these forced encounters of sociability are very important for the process of education and learning also.
Totally.
No, sorry, that just reminded me, it's just a side note to that, but I mean, what I would also say to Zoom and, like deconstructing the like educational space, there's also the fact that like that's not actually equally accessible to everybody. And it reminded me of like a Bolsonaro government ad that had these like rich white kids in fancy bedrooms like studying for the like university admission exam, like completely erasing like whatever like the rest of Brazil actually is, like the actual majority of Brazil. So anyway, I just wanted to make that side note.
I know I'm starting to talk a lot, but I'll control myself. But also something else, Josh, that came to mind when you spoke about like these spaces in education is the Escola da Ponte, which is a school in Portugal, which presents itself in a very different, it has a very different pedagogical approach. Basically, there are no grade levels. So a student that is maybe 18 will be having classes with a student that is 6 years old, and they don't follow like a strict curricula, but enter the classroom environment with questions of their own. So I think that could be also a model moving forward in this deconstructed Zoom learning environment of like allowing the students to bring their questions, bring their desires for learning into a space, and there then be this curriculum be like molded and created with, and rather than in a hierarchical manner.
That's a great point.
I have something that I'd like to add that goes back to the text and how what stood out to me in the Maria Lynn text regarding how art is consumed. And they're taking, obviously a chunk was written on MoMA. So I just wanted to read, it's just a few lines that stood out to me, which was basically about how they constructed the consumption of art. And it says, thus market strategies and business interests merge and shape the new ideals of spectatorship. Given MoMA's influential status, its approach was taken up and in innumerable other art institutions in all different parts of the world. The idea of winning people over, of persuading them, was central to MoMA's didactics from the outset, just as it was in the contemporaneous advertising industry, which was itself coming of age and transforming the new modern era. So what was interesting to me, I didn't know that early on there was all these things that were intertwined: business interests, marketing, advertising, and then it just went where we are today. It's like on steroids from where it began. So anyways, that's something that just sort of in the text popped up to me. So I wanted to just share it.
You know, actually, Boshko, too. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I've been talking a lot. Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Boshko, to respond to what you just said, it's quite a coincidence. I actually spent my entire morning reading about MoMA's good design practices in like the effort to craft this like non-alignment history that I'm doing. And you know, I would actually say that MoMA has actually really, really scaled back the level of consumer sort of demand it's asking of the people of the audienceship at this point compared to when it started out. I mean, they literally have shows in the 1940s that were entirely dedicated to producing consumers of design. And they, like much of the stuff that they like displayed were like $10 or less so that you could actually buy it. I mean, that shit would not fly right now. You know, so I think in many ways, MoMA, like as much as I want to say the beast is bad, I also don't want to put all beasts in the same bed, and I want to understand these beasts are quite nuanced. I think the MoMA, I actually took, like, I thought Maria Lin's examination of the MoMA was remarkably unnuanced. There's so many other things that the MoMA is doing, not necessarily good or bad, that she's sort of negating in her effort to make this really broad-based institutional critique. That I thought was really kind of not useful for me. For example, like, I mean, in her critique of sort of mediation and her, like, so she's like talking about the fact that like as soon as you put any work of art in the MoMA, it's attached to a genealogy and it's reinforcing this particular canon, and that's absolutely true. That being said, MoMA has also had a number of shows that are responding to they're remarkably politically contingent in the past several, whether it's their Muslim ban protest of 7 pieces or whatever, they are responding to various things. It's simply the nature of the MoMA that as soon as political art enters the institution, it gets turned into sort of an object of consumption. And that's something I don't think she really brought up in a fruitful way.
And piggybacking on that, like the new MoMA's educational department does offer like, I mean, it is completely different in its approach of how it used to be, in a sense that they're trying to recycle or gather new artwork that has never been seen since forever and have a proposition of actually not only engaging viewership and these museum consumers, but bringing them into this new institution that aims to like make people see what they have kept locked away in their cellars, whatever, for so long. So I think that even though, yes, it is the beast, I agree, but I think that they are trying to better themselves in their practice with this new proposition of the new MoMA.
Giovana?
No, I going back to what Boshko was saying, reading this text, what kept coming back to my mind was that, you know, that saying, like, he who plays the fiddler picks the tune. So what I was thinking about is like how much of contemporary art is dictated by like how much of our own practices are kind of informed by what collectors end up buying, you know, at least like in the like high-end like blue chip world. And when they were talking about you know, how education and like the educational departments of art institutions end up kind of being this almost like condescending process where, like, you know, you need to like bridge the gap between us here in the ivory tower and them, like the lowly people who go to the museum and don't understand art. So I mean, I don't know, I've been asking myself this question of like, you know, like who am I making work for, you know, and like for what platforms. And I was just wondering what everybody's thoughts were on that. Like, how much does that idea like inform your practice? Like, how much do you question yourself about that? And also, another thing that came to my mind reading, like thinking about this gap, right? This thing that like supposedly needs to be bridged. It reminded me of like, I read this book. It was called The New Dark Age by James Bridle, and he was talking about YouTube algorithms. You know, that like how they like kind of start like to like incentivize increasingly absurd content because that stuff can be monetized. But like it's like a completely solipsistic thing. It's not like actually like informed by what people are actually interested in. It's just like that algorithm kind of like determines that thing is going to get like viewership because it like it tags that as like the next video on playlists. And then when you go into these like rabbit holes, it's just like increasingly like nonsensical. So I don't know. I just started thinking like, like, are we kind of like maybe engendered in the logic kind of like that? And like, is that the reason why do we feel like there's this gap? So I don't know. It's like more questions that I wanted to pose. Like, I don't have an answer for that.
Well, I mean, in terms of the gap, I mean, the reality is that at least, you know, like 20th century, and especially like the kind of emergence with of MFA programs, like going back to kind of like intertwining of what is like how art education kind of intertwines with the art market and the construction of professional artists, where the question of like, who are we making work for? Like, is it a collector? Is it a, you know, kind of institutional agenda, the funding in order, like the integral part of, you know, professionalization of art is to actually seek individual funding. That in order to get it, one has to like check the boxes of kind of, you know, what's the word? You need to, you get to the place where practically as a person, or what you embody and what you make, you actually like need to cater yourself to the particular needs of the institution and actually do the work for the institution in terms of responding to the question, who is this for? What is the impact of your work? How do you fit into the programming? You know, and then those are the questions that are either integral part of the application process, or there are questions that are being asked like behind the you know, closed doors. So artists in this landscape, what is considered to be contemporary art, and contemporary art serves 1%. Like, it's just not like economically and in terms of like the places that it's being produced and with the ideas, the kind of position that is being produced from. If the goal for an artist is to participate in the contemporary discourse, and to gain visibility and institutional support, then the response is like, yes, like that's where, you know, that's why the kind of need to actually liberate art from kind of like capitalist realm comes from, because art is integral part of education. And even through like educational processes, it has, especially in the United States, I mean, art is being taught as a separate entity, as a separate class. Like later on, it's not integrated into kind of elementary school education. It's not served as a tool of like visual culture to, you know, like read different kind of you know, and it's not used anywhere, not just in United States, it's not used anywhere as a point to actually develop critical thinking. And yes, there are pockets, and I think that the second reading, like with Dipti Desai, when it comes to like artistic activism, that also has its own kind of like liberal, as much as, you know, it's, I don't even know how many steps, you know, ahead of like not having anything. It's really a great way to actually think of how art as a tool can be used to engage with one's own reality, to empower, to you know, teach oneself, but also the community how to actually use it as an investigative tool, because it is first and foremost a tool for communication. And like thinking of also like my own background and like heavily modernist, you know, education, where like modernism becomes a huge problem when it comes to and actually like becomes like foundation for kind of like normalizing oppressive society, where like in order to be an artist, like one has to have a certain talent, has to, you know, self-express and so on. But as long as that self-expression is not disruptive, as long as it's, you know, freedom to imagine, freedom to think, and, you know, go into certain kind of like paths of escapism. But as long as is, you know, the conversation goes into a specificity of like why something is being made, what is being processed through that making, are you, you know, is it, what kind of trauma, how that relates to, you know, kind of like systemic oppression and repression. It's not, it's out of the conversation. So even in the, like I'm talking about, you know, and some people are familiar, like in terms of, you know, like post-Yugoslav context, like there are no spaces, there are zero spaces in conventional institutions, in public institutions, where one can actually process, talk openly about PTSD, about what the whole nation went through, about accountability, not to mention to actually create, to integrate in an integrated way, use art, which is absolutely necessary in that context of kind of, you know, completely traumatized bodies to speak to one's own truth and to kind of externalize that trauma in some like constructive and educational way that is actually like empowering for the community. So in that sense, the question of like how is art, like there are these, like, in, to put it kind of like black and white, there's like two kind of streams of action. When art as a contemporary art that is kind of like embracing the idea of kind of contemporaneity, that art exists in a particular discourse that is kind of segregated from, you know, segregated from one, it's like dislocated, you know, it's, you know, as what do you embody as an artist? And then on the other side, the art that is actually kind of, which is again, this kind of like art as therapy thing, has kind of like, in a sense, kind of like pacified the power that art has to actually mediate a lot of harm that has been done to people and to different communities. So I think that talking about museums, I'm just like not, you know, like there is one thing is a museum, there is also who has access to it, how, and maybe, you know, like people who have experience here being educators in museums or similar kind of contexts, in terms of how these networks are being created. How do you choose schools, for example, that would come to the museum for tours? Like, how are these decisions being made? That's again, you know, like very exclusive environment that is a public institution, but it's again very exclusive. It depends of so many different kind of like relations in terms of, you know, like level of comfort, level of kind of exclusiveness that one feels, or like lack of, you know, welcoming. I mean, it's just like not like very small percentage of people feel welcome in these institutions of art and culture. And especially when you're talking about New York, predominantly people who go to museums are tourists. So that's like a whole nother thing. Yeah, but I don't want to.
Just this, which just made me think of like two works, the Zoe Leonard's I Want to Die for President, but also the Andrea Geyer's Manifest, where she created this manifest on what a museum should be, an institution should be, and like I want a museum to gather, I want a museum to welcome my noise to, anyways. So like thinking about this in terms of like the institution, and even like piggybacking on, not piggybacking, but like going back to the whole Dana Schutz event, where the whole protest that was initiated was because of like Black don't belong here. And I think that the push for the connection I made basically is like how these institutions, how this reading of institution that we did, Maria Lind, and what's the name? Wait, 1 second. The New Worlds text can actually come together in terms of like deconstruction also of what a museum is and what is the purpose of an art that goes to the museums versus a more utopian idea of what this space, this locus actually can potentially generate in terms of like not only art education, but like art and political engagement. I don't know if I made sense. I don't know.
Maybe you can talk about the Rojava example a little bit more.
Well, maybe Caterina can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it. I mean, from not knowing so much about it, it seems like that's a really great example of artists, people, activists initiating change on their own terms and not waiting for someone else to do it because there's no one else to do it.
Well, I mean, that's kind of also, it's like Rojava was there in terms of for like multiple reasons. First of all, like self-governing, and how actually like how the role of education and the role of art in the context of conflict and like necessity to self-govern, and especially this kind of eco-feminist an example of eco-feminist government, but also this like collaboration, like that was another aspect that, you know, I was like the question of like what does it mean to collaborate within that context, and to have an artist like Jonas Stahl create an assembly that is now being used by the community itself. But I think Caterina, if you would like to maybe talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I don't know what to say exactly. To be honest, I feel completely disoriented because of the time. It's 12 o'clock at midnight here. Yeah, I don't know. I loved that text, and thank you for sending it to us. I think that while reading it, and while knowing some things about Rojava and the self-governance, I was wondering how this idea of self-governance could be adopted by a new, maybe, I don't know, alternative art institution, like the fact that people could gather and artists could be completely autonomous. This is what I was thinking nowadays while I was reading this text. Also because in Greece, this week, there was a very big mobilization of cultural workers, since the majority of cultural workers in Greece did not receive any financial aid from the government during the pandemic. And there is no union of cultural workers. There is a union for actors, for example, but there is no one union that can embrace all cultural workers. So there has been this discussion that has started now with several demands, not only about, you know, an emergency and, you know, about a short-term financial aid, but also about a long-term financial aid, a long-term strategic plan for cultural workers in Greece. And because actually there were some funds, but you had to apply for some public programs in order to get them. So they were not available for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, this is some thoughts that I have had these days. I really feel very, I don't know, concerned about what's going on. And it is difficult for me to connect to everything that you're saying, even if it is very interesting. And yeah, like the other idea is what I really find interesting in the text is the whole idea of how necessary might be to deconstruct some institutions that we consider to be how to say that we consider to be necessary for our existence. And that was what happened also in Rojava with the nation state idea that was completely actually, like they managed to uncouple democracy from the nation state and to create something from zero. And this is what I'm wondering about, you know, if it is possible, like to do something like that about the cultural sector. And what if museums are not extremely necessary for artists or for cultural workers? Also what you said, Nataša, before, like that you have to, yeah, I don't know.
Thanks.
I think that the answer that like occurs to me, and obviously is probably an incomplete one, but I think that like the question of where the money comes from is like central to like everything, right? Because like if we consider that we care about our artistic practice and art in general because it speaks about the world that we all share, and that like it speaks to the experience of common people, and it serves to a certain degree to like uphold democracy and the commons and all of that, then it makes no sense to expect that like, you know, like an industry that's ultimately funded by billionaires is going to be the space where that's going to happen, right? So I think that like the answer I see to that is that like there should be more artists organizing with like socialist movements right now. So like, I mean, within like the Bernie Sanders campaign, like I don't think I heard much of like funding for the arts and like things like that, because I think that like, you know, I don't really know about the model of the National Endowment for the Arts, but like I honestly did like a massive public funding effort for the art industry is like one of the main ways that I see to like address that. And I think that we should probably figure out a way to like push for that within existing movements, if that makes any sense.
I mean, that's an interesting point, because on one side, you know, art, I can't remember who said that, but, you know, art makes revolution desirable. And that's really great, but also art is not just like a decoration for revolution. It's a, you know, it is a catalyst of change if it's actually embraced as a tool to critically think and to examine, to investigate, to, you know, act upon certain ideas and think of also at methodology, you know, especially like now when there is so much, there's so many questions, especially with this like new kind of, you know, like an obvious example when it comes to like using technology for, you know, for communication and like Zoom and everything, like methodologies become the key question, like how, you know, how to actually employ methodologies that can merge these different disciplines in educational purposes, but without, you know, there's always this question of, first of all, like vilifying, you know, artists, where yes, of course, you're not going to see the funding like as a part of the like Bernie Sanders campaign that is going to support artists if artists are being labeled as, you know, kind of elitist pieces of shit that don't have anything to do with you know, they're like that artists are not working class, which is like inherently not true, because artists belong to cross sector. Like it's, you know, so many artists are at the same time essential workers. Not every artist works in like academia or has like a, you know, however, like full-time artist, you know, position, and you know, works within like institutional support.
They work in restaurants too.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, like a lot of art, and the conversation about kind of like labor cross-sector is practically like inexistent. And now we see this like, especially with like specific kind of like artist reliefs, and then, oh, in order to get this like artist relief grant, like you have to have, you know, like long CV, like you have to have a proof that you have been like professionally active and institutionally supported, and we'll give you $5,000. Well, like, fuck you, you know, I mean, so that's like how to like deconstruct the concept of an artist as someone who is you know, capital oriented. And that doesn't mean, you know, and this whole conversation about like, oh, selling painting versus being, you know, like critically minded. Well, I mean, if you are you know, most of the money comes from real estate development. So if you can have the most you know, you can think that you are creating, and that's, I think, in the, it's interesting kind of point in the artistic activism text, in terms of, you know, making politicized or political work versus like kind of engagement inducing work.
Spectrum, yeah.
Where
political versus activist.
So, and also, I mean, I think it's some interesting conversations this past period in terms of like how, you know, activism is being framed, but also like, you know, shaming of like non-activists, like artists who are, you know, experiencing kind of like discrimination because, you know, they, as an artist, they cannot make enough money to contribute in the household. So it's just like all this, like there is so much like vilification that is happening from the projection of certain kind of like class and privilege that is tied to the position of artist, which in a lot of cases is true, but also like it's not. But if we are thinking from the perspective of like professionalized artist position, then yes, like if you have a necessity to actually be recognized and to strive on kind of like climbing the ladder and like following the logic of kind of a market-oriented logic, then like yes. But then so many people are, you know, having daily practices and or just like any kind of practices that are integral part of everyday life, and they're not being commodified. So that is also art, and that is arguably more relevant as a tool than one actually desiring constantly audience that is being, you know, like cultivated audience, or that consumer, or however it's, you know, like what Rashmi was talking about also, about these like different stages of like kind of educational developments within the institutions, which you know, again, are mostly done by artists who are underpaid, but yeah. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. Maja.
Sorry, guys. I think I come from very different context, so I don't know, maybe this helps, maybe not. I think Europe functions already in very different way, like especially Netherlands, like where the museums are publicly funded. So it's not depending on the private donation that doesn't exist. So that does allow certain freedom in also in exhibition making and education. And I think there was a big move, you know, there was this educational turn Maja was talking about, and also with Eryka, especially in relation to this text. I think, I don't know if any of you read her, but would recommend highly Eryka. And I think, I don't like, it's, for me, of course, personally, it's very difficult to connect to the conditions here. I don't know so well, as a tourist, like museums would be the last place I would go here to see art, just contemporary art now. Like I find it really, you know, my experience with it was very commercial, and yeah. And I was actually more interested in educational program than art, which is also kind of contradiction in itself. But like I think you covered, yeah, it was really interesting to follow all of your different points, but I also find it to be a lot, like jumping from education, which I think it's very different here and in Europe. Like I'm also part of education in Netherlands. Like I'm in advisory board of master program there for fine arts, and there's I think, yeah, it's already different than here. It's already different that it's of course much cheaper. It's more affordable for people there, and it also has more freedom in itself. Like, so we also talk about different, I don't know how it's here, but like we also talk about numbers, like where master program in Netherlands is 20 people, and I don't know how many it's actually here. So these are the different kind of, so I find it, you know, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I find like what I noticed in recent years in Dutch context, it's also that museums and educational institutions start asking this, like, okay, what are we here for, and who are we here for? So the whole focus moved to the community and local community, and also yeah, proximity somehow. And I have to say, like, Netherlands has, like, each city has a big contemporary museum. So that's also a whole other aspect. And each basically largest city has art academy and master of program. So you can imagine, like, it's a small country that it's, you know, it's overly populated, but like, yeah, if I just have to say, like, I think it's probably 10 art academies and 10 MFA programs in such a small country that it's like, what, third of Serbia, I think. So it's kind of interesting economy behind that also, like what art is considered in educational sense. Like I do think they're trying to hint to what you were, Nataša, saying, is trying to use it as a critical thinking, which also produces another set of problems, which is being also commodified in a bit, but also commercialized in a sense of art as creative thinking and creative force in thinking, which is something very different than what we imagine. I also lost a bit of my track of thinking, but yeah, I find, like, I don't know all the conditions here. So I think it's also interesting to understand, like, when you talk about teaching here, what does that mean? Like, you know, because as I assume most of you work in like teaching, right? Am I misunderstanding this? No, okay. So it's just, yeah, it's something that I kind of, I don't know, like, I have a feeling European context is still this, I don't know, island of idealism that it's, of course, is being lost slowly comparing to here. Like, it's different. And the museums are still places for public to kind of use somehow. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just too romantic now, just being here.
I resist. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, did anybody else want to say something?
Go for it.
Oh, so no, I resist the idea of, like, using, like, Central and, like, Northern European systems as, like, a model for the rest of the world. I mean, especially coming from a place like Brazil, because, you know, the only reason why those countries have, like, accrued their wealth in the long term that allows for such, like, an idyllic, you know, publicly funded art industry and whatnot, is the fact that the exploitation was entirely outsourced, you know, so, like, to Latin America, to, like, you name it, right, in Eastern Europe even. So I think that, like, that's, like, the only observation I wanted to make. I think that, like, it's here, it's, like, commonly, like, a liberal impulse should be like, oh, but look at Sweden, you know, and then like list of great things that like of like the social security net that Sweden has or that Denmark has and that we don't. But like I think that, you know, in Brazil we say that the whole is deeper, you know, there's more to that, because if we're rethinking art funding, and if we're rethinking like what, like the very context from which our practices emerge, I think that we need to consider the fact that like if it necessitates like exclusion of some from this like said universality, then it's still like a mutilated universality. I don't know if that made sense. I'm sorry.
Just wanted to say I didn't propose it as a model. To make this clear.
Yes, that is. Yeah. I think Sanja is talking but is on mute. Sanja, can you unmute?
Sorry, guys. I thought I did, but then I maybe mute. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, it's almost midnight, but yeah, it's my regular schedule. I just wanted to add something that we discussed earlier that really caught my attention, kind of discussing the wrong foundation itself. And maybe, I forgot who said it, but I remember there was this kind of West, non-Western model, how it's like, no matter how we live in these global times when all this, we refer to former West or former East, we still come back to this idea of West or non-West, or idea of like Europe as a center and periphery. What?
North and South too.
Yeah, or whatever is, you know, accurate, and what I think that it's still really accurate and meaningful. But for me, this kind of maybe thinking about ambiguities of living in this world when you, as maybe non-Western or as non-white, know that the source of all capital, of money or opportunities are still coming from this, you know, ex-colonial centers of power. And then you kind of, if you want to, you know, engage, you have to come to some compromises or ambiguities that you embody, but how to refer to that or how to cope with that, maybe through yourself. I don't know. I always come back to this idea that even when we talk about art and institutions, there's always this ambiguity that we have to work with and kind of compromises we have to make. So yeah, I don't have any solutions or answers to that question, but I keep on thinking that maybe even anytime I think about democracy, something triggers inside of me. Yeah, of course, in question of Rojava, democracy or self-governing is this idea that should be positive, but I maybe am too into science fiction, but keep on thinking, why still democracy? Or, you know, is there any maybe totally new forms of kind of engaging or political structuring that we can think of, and not coming back to kind of same ideologies from the past? I don't know. Maybe I'm too into science fiction thing, but yeah, that's my thoughts.
I think
sorry. Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of the New Worlds text, because it genuinely offers a different way of thinking about democracy, because we're used to always like, oh, you vote, you're elected, blah blah.
Yeah, you kind of attach to that. Yeah.
What I found most interesting, that I was like, oh my God, this is like amazing, like, you know, was when she mentioned, or they mentioned the representatives, like a male and a female representative. I found that like, oh wow, that's it, that's the solution. But then also like, okay, so what does male mean? What does female mean? Like, who will decide? And then you get back into all these questions of like otherness. And I think this, I don't know, I think it's so crazy that we already live in a democratic environment where people can minimally, I mean, not, but minimally coexist respectfully. I mean, I can't even believe I'm saying this because it's such bullshit, but anyway. But anyways, this is the proposition, right? We live in a democratic environment. that this text for me made it really interesting to see how we do not need a state. We need micro-organizing and micro-politics that are created in small bubbles, and these bubbles kind of touch each other in it's almost like a quilt or something. I don't know, I found it really interesting to think of how this could also be adapted into not only politics, but right in terms of governance, but artistic organization, and also means of education and whatnot, you know, like sustain, whatever. Yeah. Anyways, just a little add on to the point, Sanja.
It's interesting also, like in terms of, you know, going back to the needing or not needing museums and what their function is, and governing and self-governing. Like, for example, you know, growing up and being educated in a place where museums were closed for 15 years. So just like, what does it mean to actually, you know, get a sense of self without the access to the institutions that would like perpetuate this like nation state or national myth building and so on, but being, you know, like having like lack of resource that would actually be a puzzle to that certain identity that the museums actually perpetuate. Is it colonial? Is it imperialist? Is it so? Like the proximity to that kind of imperialist narrative and the active engagement within it, I think that the answers are somewhere there, like in terms of how do we use institutions, and like how self-governing, or that you know, what Caterina was saying, the autonomy of the artist, and plays a crucial role in terms of like how we kind of like reconstitute the institution as a concept. I don't know, I think that the intimacy plays a huge part, kind of like diasporic intimacy, then also this kind of like relationship between hyper-local and global, the embracing of, you know, it's really like, it made me think what Anna said in terms of these kind of like spheres, you know, touching upon each other of these bubbles, or practically kind of like a Volvox structure, like some kind of like rhizomatic way of working, where there is a hyper, you know, it's always a matter of focus, like where one's, like in either of an individual or community, like where the focus is actually being directed. Is it inward or is it outside? Is it like, you know, do you deal with oneself, like not in a kind of exclusionary way, but in terms of, you know, one's kind of like as a healing process, or as a just, you know, can we imagine, you know, like life outside of capitalism? Is everything that we think of, create, act upon, is it formulated as against something, or is it in itself its own right to actually, you know, imagine some world that is not necessarily like formulated by the repressive measures that we all experience differently. So yeah. Yeah, Nechama.
This actually makes me think of the Octopus in Love text by Chuz Martinez. And I thought that text was just so beautiful with just the metaphor of using an octopus. And I think that like that text really specifically addresses like what you were saying in terms of like how art can reinvent something entirely. And she also uses the metaphor of an octopus as like a decentralized way of sensing and working. And I think that that text kind of like brings a lot of the things that we were just talking about all together. And like, so in terms of like how artists can really like be a critical asset to like remaking the things that are kind of really oppressive in this time. So, and like, I don't know, like maybe is it more of the responsibility of the artists and to reinvent the way things work, or is it the people who are working in the institutions or are funding the institutions? And I don't know, I'm thinking, I guess I'm coming more from the perspective as an artist than like as a cultural worker. And
maybe
so,
both.
yeah. Both, you say?
Maybe both?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would like, ideally, I would like for artists and cultural workers to work together, but at least like I've participated in a few meetings within New York, and it seems that, I don't know, like the perspective of many cultural workers in New York who are interested in labor and like unionizing don't seem to be interested in like working with artists to reinvent things in the situations and meetings that I've participated in. So it's just, I'm not saying that's like a general thing that's actually, I'm not saying that's like what's going on in general, but from my experience recently, like, I don't know, like, I would like cultural workers and artists to work together, but how do you make that happen?
What are the cultural workers interested in?
Like, I mean, like coming from the perspective, like the administrators and educators, they kind of, they're more interested in protecting themselves as like a separate cultural and like aspect of the whole arts world, as artists are like the people who are separate, and then the cultural workers are like their own thing. But I don't know, that's just been my experience. But ideally I'm like, I'm in support of like everyone working together, and I don't know if it's like, if the Martinez text was like more utopian than like how would you put that text into practice? Because I thought that was just such a beautiful text that she wrote. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I responded to those metaphors too, both of the octopus and the rainforest. And I think part of the reason we selected it is that because it's talking about a Museo do Barrio, and I mean, I'm not super familiar with the history, but there were some New York Times articles and New Yorker articles talking that that particular museum is in a lot of internal distress right now, because starting from these utopian idealistic origins, now they don't really have their people on their board are not primarily Latina or Latinx. You have people, you have a lot of big money that's involved. It's a much larger institution. And so it's an example of a place that started with good intentions and maybe still have those good intentions, but has changed quite a bit into the thing that it was trying to escape with to begin with.
Where does their money come from?
The museum? I don't know. It's talking about that in the article, and I'll share the two articles that I found from last fall. It's talking less about the money aspect and more about just the representation, the board members, the type of artists and exhibitions that they're showing are more blockbuster. They're bigger artists. It's not serving, imported. They're not serving the original mission that they've gone astray. So, but yeah, I mean, in talking about imagining new possibilities and how we could, that was the useful thing there. And to be honest, I mean, a big part of this is we're asking ourselves these very questions, like doing HEKLER, trying to embody and make these things happen. What are the things that we should avoid? What are the things that we can do to make sure that that we don't turn into the things that we're trying to criticize, that we're trying to move away from? So I'm still ruminating on what what those metaphors can be. Having a rainforest. I think
Anna asked about the octopus.
Sorry, what? Anna was asking?
You have questions.
Oh, well, this like
a long time ago. Sorry.
Oh, well, you were asking me. You're asking Nechama.
Nechama.
Yeah. Maybe you
can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I just.
Well, I guess. Like she talks about it in several layers of like, she talks about it in terms of like she goes into networks and like having art interpret the chaos that, like the noise of like through the senses. And I kind of, I feel like as an artist, like that's what I like to do. Like that's what I like to think I'm doing when I'm making work. And I think like, it's just so hard also, like that pressure of like inventing something entirely new. Like what does that, I'm wondering also for myself, like what does that really look like? And like, I want to see so many changes within the structure of the art world, particularly like in the United States. And like,
I just,
yeah, oh.
No,
sorry.
Like a random question, like, oh, what did you like about it? It wasn't like
well,
No, I'm just, cause I'm like thinking through for myself as I'm answering. So like, I've also like, I've been drawn to using an octopus in like some of my video.
Yeah, no, I love octopus.
So like,
and I love.
I don't know. That's why. Yeah.
Sensitive, so I was just like, oh, cool. She likes octopuses too.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So.
There's some element I think I found here that amidst all this, what the White Cube discussion has lacked, so White Cube Museum kind of establishment has lacked is precisely a rainforest, the principle that in its radical otherness defies the container, since the life force represented by the rainforest cannot be contained. So the idea that you put something that is unscripted, that is life, that is unfolding, that's progressive, that's messy, that's chaotic, if that is what's cherished and what's put as the foundation of whatever institution, whether it's art or otherwise, I mean, institutions want to set things in order. That's the point, right? That's why we like to have things, or those institutions want to have things contained and have things in order and make sense. And there's something about, maybe it's superficial. Maybe it's just that this text is really just saying like, well, we need to break that idea and start over. And it's not really offering any solutions outside of that. It's just the impetus to think, to just have a contradiction. But I think that's the most provocative part. Less about the octopus, more about the rainforest. I mean, with the octopus, there was another text that we're going to include by Donna Haraway that's talking about tentacular thinking, and that it does go back to the issue I think a few people have talked about. Definitely Anna was saying is, how is it possible to make an institution, a system, whatever word you want to use, that has these independent, Ava's joining in.
It's perfect moment.
Yeah. Hi, Ava. Turn on your audio, Ava.
Hi, sorry I'm so terribly late. I had a work meeting until now.
It's all good.
You're
welcome.
Good to see you all.
We were just, do you want to introduce yourself real quick, Ava, if you could?
Sure. I'm Eva Davidova. I'm a visual artist who is interested in the political implications of technology and how we can invent new actions towards climate disaster, economic injustice, and against war in the realm of art and technology.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we were talking about octopuses and rainforests. No, we were so we'll just I don't really have too much to say, but we were just talking about that particular reading and what the potential for those metaphors are and what they might mean to people in creating a new way forward.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the rainforest, and like now thinking about what Giovana mentioned earlier with regards of like the Brazilian politics mess. And like, even in that context of like, oh, rainforest, it's so prolific, it's such an environment for growth of like several, like flora, fauna, whatever. Even in this context, we have humanity, society, whatever, domesticating this wild, free environment. So I think that it's very, this idea of like, oh, we need to give order, or in order to make sense of what is around us, be it art, be it politics, education, whatever, is I find it funny because I think it's actually like our nature to not go into like unruliness. Like, even with, if you go back to the Maria Lind text of like mediation, we don't need to mediate art. Art is there and you will have a sensation, right? Or not. But we have this need to explain, to decode, to make it accessible or not in the case. So it's interesting how this metaphor, at least to me, is ai meu Deus, how do I say this in English? Faca de dois gumes. How do you say? Unmute. How do you say it?
Unmute?
Wait.
Double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
Thank you. But you know, yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to say, or?
I want to hear Eryka.
Hey.
Hi.
Yeah, I guess I have had a little bit of trouble finding exactly where to insert myself to speak, because, and I've been like kind of reflexively like thinking about that throughout this entire conversation. And I've just been thinking about how, I guess, just my own lineage of like art making and like where that's happened, where that generally takes place, like who I'm making my work for. And for most of my life, the people I was making my work for were actually people like I knew intimately, and it was a pretty like tight community. So it was sort of this like very easily recognizable symbiotic relationship between the artists and the community, where there was like, you know, like mutually witnessed growth. But then when I think about that, like in relation to ideas of artist activism and, you know, like political art, and I don't see it as that, even though there's these kind of similarities of, you know, like knowing your community, like spending time and engaging with people, and like kind of like being in on the conversation, and like finding it maybe easier to contribute to the conversation because you're just kind of in one place with those people, intimate with the spaces that these things are happening in. And it could be backyards, it could be public spaces. Whereas like having moved to New York in the last 2 years, I've now actually entered twice the museum context. And actually it wasn't through my own work, it was as a kind of, as a performer for other performers. So I was performing in their works. And so I guess where I've kind of felt inclined to add to the conversation has been in regards to maybe this idea of like the over collaboration that was sort of brought up in the text between a curator and the artist, where the artist is making something for the museum or making something for the curator. I definitely like have examples of that, like lived examples of that, where I've witnessed this trickling down from like the institute, you know, having this idea to bring in this artist, and they bring the artist into the institute, and then, you know, the artist kind of like has to think of these pieces to lay out, like objects that the institute provides financial support to purchase and manifest. And then, you know, in the case of like an ensemble performance work, these hired performers, like you know, it's like you get paid this certain amount of money, and then there's like this kind of relationship between visibility and like money. So, you know, this whole trick of like, oh, well, it's going to create visibility for you to, you know, put your work here, and then that's kind of supposed to take the place of money. It's like, you know, it's this ongoing, like really like disgusting conversation. And I was just interested, and also like really, you know, turned off by, in these situations of being a hired performer, by these like dynamics between like the contract, for instance, which is like one of the first things I received, which is also similar to like, you know, it's like if I'm working as a janitor, which has been like a job I've had, or like if I'm working as like an art handler, if I'm working as, you know, someone else who's hired to come and perform a particular task. In these situations, it was like more complicated, because I would be hired to like bring my body into a space, to be there for some of hours, like exert energy. But then also in some cases, like in one of the cases, it was like a choreography. It was very straightforward that actually felt better to me than in the cases where I was hired and then asked to like do a lot of creative work for that artist. And, you know, being with a team of other collaborating hired performers, it was like the artist then sort of felt like an extension of the institution, who was then like having this particular expectation of us, you know, to make their work for them in a way. And then it was like, in the end, like, it was just this weird loop, you know, that just kind of felt like every entity, including myself, was like perpetuating and kind of like upholding this system, you know?
Yeah.
But it was like hard to disentangle in the moment, because there's just so many, I mean, there's the artist, there's the institution, there's the people working in the institution that you're passing in the hallway. There's like the multiple curators who are like sometimes from the original country that the artist is coming from, and then like the people that are the curators within something like Performa, and then, you know, the people that work at the venue. And then, you know, the description for the piece is being written like while it's being made, and you don't even know like how the work is being like presented, but you're like enacting it. So I know, I'm sorry, this is like,
no,
just,
I have
I'm speaking just from experience, sorry.
This is really great. I just have a question for you for the example where you said when it was a choreography, it was much better. So when it wasn't, where you said where you're putting much more energy and creative thinking, would you say the lines were there completely blurred as to what was initially asked from you to do?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Or somewhat blurred.
I mean, I feel like, you know, that kind of brings up this whole conversation about like ambiguity, you know, and like being like deliberate and thoughtful and having an intention, and then being like ambiguous with an intention of having like being ahead of the game, or being able to make mistakes because you're being ambiguous, you know. So then it's kind of like, sometimes you can then have the people under you as like what feels sometimes like a lab rat, you know, because it was like while we were making the work, like we were constantly being observed, you know, and it felt like this laboratory, you know, and it definitely had this sense of this hierarchy where like, you know, the people who are actually the bodies or the material of the art itself felt like the most like judged, or the most like observed, you know. So I would say that it's like yes and no. In the beginning, it was like ambiguous, but then we were given references to previous art that was made by this artist to kind of, it felt like it was an implication, like, oh, it'll look something like this last project I was doing. It's, you know, it has this kind of set of like, it has all this writing about it and blah, 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 but then we kind of go into it. It turns out to just be, something different. But, oh yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm just rambling. Please.
No, I was just gonna say that what you're saying, I mean, this experience is really similar to my own experience and like other people's experience that I know, and working like as assistants to like artists that, you know, like are like represented by blue chip galleries and like have been in the art world for a very long time. where like that labor relationship gets becomes blurry because like it's so based in like an interpersonal relationship, and there's also kind of like a resistance of seeing that as labor. So yeah, I was actually thinking about something that like while Nechama was saying something earlier about like art workers not necessarily being interested immediately in collaborating with artists. It made me think that, you know, like a lot of artists' livelihoods come from being art workers, right? So, I mean, I wonder how much of that like collaboration, so to speak, doesn't happen in like the guaranteeing material conditions that are decent enough to ensure that everybody like has the ability to have a sustainable practice, you know what I mean? And like I don't know if like those two categories are necessarily at odds. And also I don't know, I just like kind of wanted to throw it out there that like, you know, like how much of the art that we see in museums is actually like materially created by people like Eryka, or like, you know, like like creating the thing, really, like not only like performing and like following directions, but like providing creative work and like not being acknowledged for that. So I don't know, yeah, just wanted to throw it out there.
I mean, that's the reality all over the place. I mean, even if you're invited to work as an art handler, at least this is like a New York situation, it's not a surprise to all of a sudden find yourself fabricating the actual work. And that's considered art handling.
We had one very prominent example of that together.
We actually worked together on like making this ridiculous thing for like Casey Kaplan, which was a bunch of like shoelaces and shit from like indigenous Canadian artists who paid like $10,000 for just like shoelaces to make this like ridiculous curtain. Yeah.
Or you have to problem solve, but you're an art handler.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I mean, you don't know, like you come to, I mean, and that's the reality for so many art handlers. You just like show up in the space. A lot of times it's not even communicated what is the set of problems that you need to resolve. And sometimes that's just like putting a painting on the wall, or like setting up like a 5-channel, you know, video installations with like floating screens and shit. So it's, and most of the art handlers are actually artists, and a lot of people, you know, it's like I would really love, and that's something that like following the news about this like layoffs and everything during the pandemic, like there is no single mention about blue chip, you know, artists and people who are part of the museum collections who are, you know, like exploiting and like laying off artists from their like art factories. Like Takashi Murakami furloughed all of his stuff, all of his whole staff. Then Carol Bove also, like all these people who are actually like directly feeding into the market as we know it, they've like laid off their staff during this period, and there is no mention about it in like art news or wherever.
Art for the cause.
Yeah. I mean, it's not surprising that they would want to lay low for something like that. Just like all the museums, but it is that the museums really did catch most of it, especially at the beginning. Maybe not so much now that people have acclimated and moved on, but I mean, with the emergency session with the Vera List Center, there was a big discussion about that. Well, the past 2 sessions really kind of been about that, right? I mean,
well, not necessarily about the layoffs in cultural sector. I mean, this one was more about what's happening in academia with adjuncts and and student debt, kind of like organizing and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, there is really, I mean, that's if you know, it's kind of, if we are talking about this like exploitative economy and the which has kind of like practically like necropolitics within the art world, you know, that's where that kind of like foundation has to be destroyed, and artists are kind of on the bottom of the pyramid, carrying like the whole industry forward. And I mean, that's the huge question of complacency. There's the huge question of like lack of transparency when it comes to the nature of the workplaces and the domination, kind of like domination culture within them. And it's, I don't know, I mean, it really varies like from like one like cultural context to another in terms of like what is the type of conversation that one has in terms of you know, salaries, in terms of any kind of like work equity. But in the United States, that's just not the case, and it's becoming part of the conversation, like in the past period, practically as we, you know, kind of like entered recession. And but in a lot of cases that it's not still transparent. But like that question of complacency, you know, like where the transitions from intimate places, what like Eryka was saying, you know, like what is wrong with art that is integral part of community care, that is not like waving the flag and, you know, like commodifying activism and you know, like aestheticizing politics, because there's like shit ton of stuff out there that's just like straight on politicized politics. Maybe artists think that they're making this kind of like uncomfortable installation or uncomfortable, I don't know what, but it's like, it's not uncomfortable, you're paid to make it. Like, it's obviously, you know, pleasing to, yeah, but I think there's definitely a lot to say about artistic position as a position of resilience and adaptability. And also kind of like it's very kind of like logistical. There is like aspect to kind of like organizational skills to being an artist. And throughout this whole period and since forever, it's been like very kind of like subdued position. And you know, through education, first and foremost, we've been kind of in different capacities, especially in Western context, with kind of like capital-oriented education, that you know, that artists are there to serve particular audience, and that audience, it's like, then the question is like, what is the audience? What is the public? And instead of like your community. So I think that art being a critical aspect of community care is what actually brings it into political realm, and not like making political art for someone to consume it. I mean, it's also like, I don't want to sound like I'm, you know, like generalizing and making these like wide strokes of like whatever, but there's like nuance to all of that.
Well,
I mean, it's, oh.
Go for it. No, I was just going to say we're at 6 o'clock, so
I was gonna
we can definitely keep going, but if people need to leave.
You're not prisoners.
Yeah, feel free. And
oh, Josh, let her talk. She was quiet the whole thing. Now
I was just going to say, I was just like a small comment in response to what you were saying just now, but it's just this question also of like, this assumption that the audience is the same, the audience is equal, or the people are equal, you know, in their lives, versus like entering a space like the museum, you know, or entering like a different venue. It's not, you know, the audience is also very much like affected by being in those spaces as well, which would make them like more or less open or closed or comfortable or uncomfortable in terms of being able to express, you know, in relation to what they're seeing, and even just being able to like take in the information.
But isn't that true of any space? I mean, it's not,
yeah,
it's just a museum. Like even outside, I mean, you can have a good day and a bad day, and you're not, you know.
Yeah. No, I guess I meant just this kind of idea of like equalizing. Okay, I'll just describe a really quick situation in Chicago. There's Mana Contemporary. There's a Chicago Mana Contemporary. It's located in Pilsen, which is primarily a Mexican community. And there was this kind of recognition on the part of the institution that even though it was like located in Pilsen, in the heart of Pilsen, that, you know, it wasn't necessarily like accessible, or it didn't necessarily feel accessible to a lot of the community there. So I guess I'm just saying that.
No, I completely understand.
Just bringing people into it doesn't mean that, you know, doesn't make it accessible.
No, I totally understand your point.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say about what Nataša was talking in the end about generalizing or making big strokes, and that there are nuances. I do think that is super important, especially at this time, to be very careful with language and try not to put things in endless categories and make comparisons which can be harmful. But on the other hand, I think it is time to make big claims and say big words and want big things, because as the song goes, it's time because there is no time. So we are really in a very loaded moment, and if we don't speak now, it will be difficult to speak later. I don't know if it made sense.
No, it made sense. I just wonder, well, can you exemplify a case where it's well used or poorly used?
Well, it's always easier to exemplify when it's poorly used. When, for example, nowadays people are talking about that New York is a war zone, or doctors have to kill people, and this is a very horrible use of the language, because even though we all understand that it might be a metaphor, but it persists. It creates a subconscious feeling of that the blame is there and not where it really is in the power structure. So that's one of the bad examples, not to mention names as Noam Chomsky, whom I usually like. But for good examples, I think is when people are not afraid to say that they have been wronged or somebody has been wronged, and in a very, very strong way. And if somebody's not, I don't know, I just don't have on top of my head a specific example, but sorry.
Eva, to address what you just said, and hi, I haven't seen your face in a long
Hi,
time.
Rashmi, so good to see you.
It is so good to see you. And to the rest of the crew, she has also taught in my class 3 times, I think. Anyways, Eva, I could not possibly agree more. And I think it's such a beautiful way to like sort of like close up shop, if we are closing up shop. I'm glad to stay longer. But yes, this militarization of the language now with COVID, I realize it's not necessarily on point with this conversation, but it's really absolutely driving that. It allows us to place the agency on different characters and alleviate sort of our sense of responsibility and a number of other political agendas that I have huge problems with. That aside, what I am sort of in a limited fashion being exposed to increasingly these days is precisely what you just said, like in terms of calling out sort of ills in power structures and whatnot, and doing it loud and saying it proud. What I've discovered is with certain of the people that I know who are involved in arts activism in certain circles, there is a tendency to use a remarkably exclusive language to call out the exclusivity of the art world. And by that, I don't even mean necessarily an academic language, but a remarkable, like a particular brand of oppression Olympics that has led to some absurd conversations in which people are like, you know, like 15 different adjectives are attached to their right to say something, you know, like, or in like a particularly humorous one that I was exposed to yesterday. It's like, so this person couldn't make a claim to like having a lack of privilege. So she's like, my queer Dalit friend. I'm like, God damn it. Like your friends aren't your zoo animals for you to like traipse out, for you to like, you take this sort of tokenistic approach to the exclusive power structures that have alienated them. Don't use them as props. And I'm seeing that kind of taking place at this point. And I would love to see greater circumspection in the languages of oppression and privilege that are taking place around arts at this point.
Like that Zizek joke where he could say, where he says that there was the people worshiping at a synagogue, and then the rich man all said, oh God, I'm nothing, and then the poor man comes in and says, oh God, I'm nothing, and everybody shuns him for being like, who do you think you are to say that you're nothing? Right, so like intersectionality bingo.
Yeah, yes.
Does anyone want to add anything to this? No.
I think that's.
I would. Thank you very much, Nataša and Joshi, for putting this together. It was really like, I don't know, just reading the text and even like basically having to like read something, because I haven't done that since grad school, whatever, is so refreshing to start really like thinking about things and not about what's going on out there that is so horrible. So thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too today when I was reading the text. I was so grateful to you to have prompted me to read something completely different and to think about things that I wouldn't have thought if it wasn't for this.
Awesome. Thanks, Boshko.
Mm-hmm. We did it for totally selfish reasons and for the same reasons.
Basically,
so we can actually like cure ADD. Yeah.
Compliment, Nataša. Take the compliment.
Great. Yeah, thank you guys. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Hi, Farideh. Hi, Boshko.
Well, before we say goodbye, well, the next reading group is on 22nd, and it will be hosted by Rashmi and Dina. And actually, yeah, and then next week, and we'll send out the readings in like soon. Yeah, and also like next week, we'll send you also the information about the conversation with a really interesting curatorial collective from Cluj, Romania. They're called HEKLER. And so they will be talking about their kind of like curatorial practice, but also student organizing, talking about these kind of like modernist patriarchal structures of education and how that actually affects the kind of critical discourse, especially when it comes to new development, because Cluj in Romania is somewhat of kind of like San Francisco. So it's practically like a Silicon Valley of that region, and there is no space at all to actually critically talk about progress in that sense. So yeah, they're really cool, and so they will, you know, we'll have a conversation with them next week and send you a link if you are, you know, free to join. And just like to have also a group conversation.
And hopefully it'll be better timed for people in Europe, for people outside of Brooklyn, because that, right?
They actually confirmed the same time.
Oh, did they? Oh, sorry. Never mind.
I
thought they.
But we can ask for it to be, yeah, like a little bit earlier or something. But like Farideh is working.
Okay.
Are you?
Yeah, I can do earlier. Next Friday is my last day, and I finish class earlier. So if you guys.
Oh, that's awesome. So. Let us know when we can start then to move it a little bit, yeah, before. Cool. Yeah. So if you want to be like generous to actually like write your thoughts, there is that document. If you want to add any notes or references or anything, yeah. So and also like one more thing. So we are creating this like a shared folder and like a library, but we just need to organize. We have a bunch of readings and stuff that we want to organize before sharing with everyone. So if you want to contribute also readings, just send them on email and we'll file everything, and then we'll make it accessible to everybody. It's a public link. I think that's it.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.
So good to see you.
So good to see you too, Eva.
I love how you look in the darkness.
Yeah. By the